people that just love to fix cars, and their wife has a really good job or their husband has a really good job where they get the health insurance and the benefits so they can just work for the money. That's what we're forcing.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting, thought-provoking episode of the Jaded Mechanic podcast. My name's Jeff, and I'd like to thank you for joining me on this journey of reflection and insight into the toils and triumphs of a career in automotive repair. After more than 20 years of skin knuckles and tool debt, I want to share my perspectives and hear other people's thoughts about our industry. So pour yourself a strong coffee or grab a cold Canadian beer and get ready for some great conversation.
I'm sitting here tonight with a really good friend of mine, Matt Fonslow. Matt, how do you feel tonight?
I mean, I'm still breathing, so
That's
I feel pretty good.
That's the main thing, right? It's been a long winter for us up here. We're just finally starting to get rid of it, and it's been. I think that it feels like the 10th day in a row it's rained, and the grass is like super long. Everything's ditches are flooding. It's a lot of fun. So we're starting to finally roll down to the end of the tire season, which is always a plus because my body hurts from doing it. And I mean, we've got a young apprentice we've had him now, I guess about 4 months, and he's come along pretty good, but it's just, it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's not how old you get. There's just some speed factor, right? From how many doing 1,000,000 sets versus him not doing 1,000 yet. So I still get scrubbing in on a lot of them. And it's like, man, I would have not thought at almost 48 that I'd still be touching tires, but it could be a lot worse, right? So
It's going to always be worse.
Yeah. How about you guys?
Well, it's dried up a little bit. I should say it's dried up quite a bit because even though it seems like it rained just a few days ago and then we had the snow melt, got hit with some more snow, got a snow melt. It's been kind of muddy and everything.
Yeah.
And driving home tonight, there's a few tractors out in the fields. One of them was planting, and then most of them are tilling or what, with the they don't really work the soil like they used to, right? So the soil saving type techniques they're using, just a dust storm. It's a crazy dust storm. Even the planter, just a terrible dust storm. And it's like it was so wet just a couple days ago. And now you're out in the fields and you can barely see the tractor with all the dust and dirt, debris in the air. So.
And you've had snow recently. We've been I don't think we even had a flurry for it's been probably 3 weeks tomorrow since we've had even like any kind of flurry. So
yeah, I think because it all melted, right? And everybody thinks it's spring and you got the birds chirping and everything, starting to see the grass turn a little green. And then inevitably we get hit one more time. And usually it's a wet, heavy snow. I hate to put like a depth on it, but usually 2, 3, 4 inches.
Yeah.
It's super heavy, breaks branches, breaks trees. It happens like every year. And every year everyone seems so surprised it happened.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Caught off guard. So
yeah.
And you guys probably don't do as many tires as me. You're predominantly your shop. Would you say that you guys kind of specialize in Diag, or is it just like, no, you're general all around? You do anything and everything. It's just
the shop itself is bumper to bumper, everything except collision.
How big is
body work? We don't do any. The shop itself is about 10,000 square feet, and I think we have if we count the alignment rack, we have 8 hoists. And my area, so what's odd about the shop is it's very compartmentalized. There's almost like rooms, if you will. So my room will fit 3 vehicles across, left to right, and then I can usually squeeze 1 or 2 behind those. And that's just my area, and that's all flat. And then we have an alignment bay that's basically a room with the 4-post Hunter and the Hawkeye Elite alignment system in there. And so that's very compartmentalized. And then we have kind of really 2 other shop areas. One is we call like the big shop, and that's got 4 hoists, and then another section that's a little bit smaller, that's 2 hoists, and in the way back, kind of by the tire machine and the wheel balancer, is another hoist.
Yeah, nice. And I should probably ask, what's the name of the shop?
Riverside Automotive.
At Automotive. And you're in Red Wing,
Yep, Red Wing, Minnesota.
which is home of the boots.
Yes, Red Wing shoes and boots.
Very
That's
cool.
where it was born.
And you've been at this shop quite a while.
Yeah, I think it's like 11 years now, maybe going on 12.
Nice.
Maybe it is 12 years.
Yeah. Did you kind of move around a lot before that? Like, or I mean, I kind of know your background a little bit. Like I first saw your name on IATN, but you and I didn't really connect until Facebook. You know, I was on IATN before there was a Facebook, and then when Facebook kind of came along, I was not. I wasted enough time on Facebook every day. It seemed like I just went away from IATN, but I remember seeing you in there way back when, different posts, and you know, talking with some of the sharpest minds, and I was like, that guy really knows what he's talking about. So
I was probably just parroting somebody else that was way smarter than me.
but give us kind of your what got you into it. I mean, did you grow up on a farm and kind of was around it, or?
Well, I grew up on a farm, and then maybe even more importantly is my dad's parents owned a farm implement dealer. So when they first opened it, long before I was born, and maybe even before my dad was born, but it would have been open while he was a kid. It was Minneapolis Moline. That's what they sold and serviced. And after really, I think World War II is the slow demise of Minneapolis Moline. So when they kind of went belly up and got bought out, my grandpa switched to Massey Ferguson. And then for the implement stuff, what they would pull, the balers and the planters and all that, they went with Spear. At the time, it was Speary, New Holland. And then after a while, I'd have been pretty little yet, but Ford bought out New Holland, Speary, New Holland. So then it was Ford, New Holland. So yeah, that meant that was a big deal. Growing up on the farm and back in the time where you could really fix stuff in the field, and being around that helped a lot. And up at the implement, I was still pretty little when they were still doing machinery. And right around, I think like 88 is when Ford specifically said, if you're going to be a dealer, you're going to have to put in this computer system, cataloging, service information, stuff that we think nothing of nowadays. But back then, it was a big deal. Everything else was microfiche at the time, and we kind of had this file cabinet was how you looked up parts, and it worked, but it wasn't a computer.
No.
And the system was a lot of money. If I remember right, it was something to the tune of $125,000 investment.
In way back in, like, are we talking 1980 money?
Yeah, 1987, 1988.
So a substantial amount of money.
Yeah, so he's like, he told him the pound sand. He got out of the implement portion of it. No more tractors, no more machinery. What he had taken on as a sideline, again, long before I was born, was the farmers, they have trees falling into the field and they need to clear it out. And they couldn't find a place to fix their saws or buy a good chainsaw. And at the time, Homelight was considered pretty good.
Right.
Way back. And they took on Homelight for a while. And then this rep shows up one day with a super strong Swedish accent. And he sold Jensrud, or what we call Johnsrud, and then some places call it Johnsred. And the thing with Homelights were, and most chainsaws back in the day, if you let them just sit on the ground and idle while you're throwing brush or whatever, you'd go pick it up and hit the throttle and probably die.
Right.
And you'd have to start it back up. So this Johnsrud rep starts one of his saws, and I'm pretty sure it was like a 601, lets it sit outside and idle while him and my grandpa are shooting the breeze. And then my grandpa goes out, picks it up, hits the throttle, revs way up. And my grandpa says something like, okay, I'll take 4 of them. And that started the forestry and garden type of stuff, where we started out with Johnsrud, then he got Husqvarna, and eventually got steel, or still, I guess, depending on where you are in the country. And then the machinery went away. So right around late middle school and all throughout high school, very few tractor and implement repairs, but lots of chainsaws, trimmers, blowers. And that's where I picked up a lot of the troubleshooting stuff. I'd watch my dad do it, and I wanted to be just like him. I wanted somebody to bring their saw up and complain about something. I would go outside with it, pull on it a few times, or start it up and listen to it and just kind of know what's wrong. And I worked really hard at it. So I think I've told the story before. It would have been, man, probably around 11 years old, 10. I told my dad I wanted to fix chainsaws like him.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of laughed at me, and he went up, the implement property had this really, really big machine shed for storage. And a lot of what they stored was old chainsaws. People trade in their junk. They'd throw them in a bin, and then you had used parts.
Mm-hmm.
So he went up and he grabbed 2 Johns Root 621 saws and set them down on a little bench and said, make one good one. And I think he thought I would work on it for like 5 minutes, get bored, and go do something else.
Right.
See if I could get my grandpa to let me go drive one of the tractors again or something like that. But I didn't. It never occurred to me to quit.
That's good.
Yeah. And so I took them all apart and picked out the good pieces, and I got some help. It wasn't like total solo here, but got a little bit of help where you would expect to get some help. And eventually I had it all put together, and I had spark, and I was trying to get it to start, and I couldn't get it to start. And my dad went out and pulled on it like 3 times and goes, I know what's wrong with it. And he pulls the carburetor off, and we pull it apart together. And I had rebuilt the carburetor, but on the diaphragm, there was a kind of a little peg that's got to slip into the lever on the needle and seat, and I didn't do that. And he kind of laughed because he had done that before.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that saw started and ran, and my grandpa said, put a new chain and bar on it and put it on the used the used saw shelf. And I did that. And a couple days later, I stopped in after school. The school bus had dropped me off there, and he handed me like $100, and he said, your saw sold.
Wow.
So, it was a big deal.
Yeah. It's good money. And back then for 12-year-old boy, right?
I blew it all on model tractors that he sold up there.
Yeah. So the money stayed within the business. That's good.
Yeah. It was very strategic on his part, I think.
But I mean, that's kind of, you could kind of say that kind of was your first, it really lit the fire into you, right? That you enjoyed it and you have a knack for it. So,
Yeah, I think I always liked to figure stuff out. I always wanted to know how something worked. I always wanted to be able to figure out what was broken. I didn't always like actually doing the work fixing it, but I did like to figure it out. Like, could I figure out why whatever didn't work? It didn't matter what it was. And, they bought a new VCR and couldn't get it hooked up. And that was right up my alley. I figured it out.
I was always up with like that too. Like I wasn't interested in, you could show me the insides of an automatic transmission and I'd be like, okay, that's cool. Right. But if you showed me the circuitry that made it work, that was way more interesting to me. Right. Because I wanted to be, because my background at the dealer was you'd see a lot of guys that, it was rebuilt and it still was in limp, right? And you're like, oh, and it would kick over and you're just like, it'd wind up in my vein. It's like, well, this can't be that complicated, right? Like it's not, we're talking like, 98 Caravan, right? As an example. It's like, okay. So there's some stuff going on there, but it's really like, it's not what we're used to dealing with now. And I can still remember the first couple ones that I figured out, and it's just like, oh, okay, the relay circuits are bad. That's why it's in limp, because it doesn't know what to do. It's dumb, right? And I remember I bought it was a Dodge Shadow for $100 from a customer, and it had high mileage on it, and the transmission had already been rebuilt twice in the life of the car. And they were a regular customer at the dealer, and of course it comes back in, and it had been rebuilt like, I want to say 15 months before, and say 30,000 miles, right? So not a lot, but there was no warranty left on it. And they were like, I'm getting rid of this car. And a former mentor of mine, he was big into front wheel drive Chrysler, everything from the old GLHs to anything, right? And he was always buying parts. So I'm like, well, I'll buy this car because I know it's got a good engine, and and I took it, and I don't know, it was probably 3 o'clock. Shop closed down, kind of got pretty slow around 4. I remember pulling it in and like tearing through the circuits and finding like a broken wire down in the fender well area for the main relay for the TCM. And like I was still can remember I'm driving that car around the parking lot and it's shifting after buying it for $100. And I called up my friend and I'm like, I got this Shadow here that the transmission was rebuilt just a little while ago, and I said they just traded it. Do you need it? He's like, yeah. He's like, I'll give you $400 for it. So that was the first time for me that was like, and I don't want to be in the business of flipping cars, but to me that was pretty smart that you could take something that somebody just was like not interested in putting, like your saw, and putting a few hours time into it, getting something that other people would have maybe just chucked a module out because it was common, and making that much money that fast. Like to me that was like, well, that's the same kind of money that I would have made working 8 hours hanging brakes or ball joints at the dealership here. And I did it by fixing a wire that cost me 25 cents, and I just made $300 on this car, gone the next day. Like, and that kind of drove me to be like, okay, so focus on that, right? Which was because it didn't interest me. Like, I couldn't remember if it was a 3-speed or 4-speed. I didn't care, right? It was just the fact that it was broke, and a simple repair to a wire restored everything that it was supposed to do. And I thought that was the coolest thing, right? And I wasn't like, I was good at electrical drivability, but that was like, okay, this is really where I can see the money being, So that was the first light bulb moment for me that, okay, Jeff, you kind of have a knack for this.
I don't know if I had one of those moments on a car until I was probably working in a shop. I think I had really good instincts and I got away with it, a lot of stuff for a long time.
I'm there with you for sure.
Yep. Well, you know what I mean? Like I was in
1,000%.
Even in high school, somebody's car wouldn't start. They started up, maybe started to pull out of a parking lot and it died. And then they couldn't get it started. And I really had no idea what I was doing. But for some reason, it's like, I think it flooded.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, in the mid 90s, a lot of kids were still driving cars with carburetors because that's what you could afford.
Yep.
And, I would know to pry open and hold open the choke and maybe hold the throttle wide open to clear it out and it'd get going again. And everyone thought like, oh, wow, you must really know what you're doing. It's like, I don't know why I knew to do that other than I suppose a chainsaw would flood and I would know what to do, or a tractor, gas tractors at the, would have chokes on them, stuff like that. And then, the move into the profession was really just to kind of get my parents off my back. Because in after high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Right.
I mean, just really no idea, kick around the idea of the military and I don't know. I didn't know what I was going to do. But the local college had an automotive program, and the instructor had stopped into the high school shop class and kind of put on a little bit of a presentation. And part of his presentation was to kind of wow everybody with what all these parts are on a car, the electronic stuff. And he would hold them up, and I got all of them right except for a cam sensor. Mm-hmm. But I got all these other ones right because A, some of the tractors already had some of the stuff, and B, the vehicles for the implement to, tow the trailers and deliver equipment or pick it up had this stuff, and we serviced the vehicles up there. So I had some familiarity. So he goes back to his office and calls my dad right up at the implement and says, hey, your kid, he's got a bright future in auto repair. And so they're like, wow, you'll never be out of a job. They're always going to need their car fixed. That would be a pretty good gig, kid.
Yep.
And I wanted to fix chainsaws because it was easy.
Mm-hmm.
And the regional still rep calls me up at home. His name was Jim. I'll never forget it. And he's like, I really like you, and I think you do really well for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'd go broke, because the writing was on the wall already. When I first started going up there hanging out, you could pretty much buy a part for a chainsaw regardless of age.
Yeah.
If it was one of the very first ones built, you could probably still find a part for it. But the newer ones coming out, that wasn't the case. They're designed, or what do they call that? Predicted obsolescence or something like that, where
Obsolescence, yeah.
yeah, they're engineering obsolescence, and that it's going to be obsolete. You won't be able to buy parts. And even at that, like the consumer model saws that's what you sell the most of. It's getting to the point where it's too expensive to fix. If you can buy a new Stihl chainsaw, because all you really do is some limbing, and maybe a storm goes through and you got a few branches to cut up.
Yeah.
You don't need a big
Lumberjack.
saw, big pro saw. A couple $100 gets you a Stihl chainsaw and will do anything and everything you need it to do. However, now if that thing breaks, depending on what, you can hardly afford to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
You can just buy a new one. And the profit margins on the new ones are pathetic. My dad and I figured out, if you spent more than about 10 minutes with somebody on a chainsaw, you lost money.
Wow.
So we were losing money if we were acting as good salespeople on a smaller consumer saw. You start getting into the bigger stuff, probably anything over like 3 cubes or whatever, 50, 55 cc's, then the prices go up enough and margins enough to maybe spend a little bit of time, but nothing like the pro stuff. But there's not that many. The pros or the loggers, they show up, they know what they want.
Yeah.
There's 2 saws to choose from. There's the small limbing saw that's light and fast, and then there's the big one for felling, and that's what they bought. And they already knew what they wanted. They'd walk in and say, I need a new saw. You need the big one or the small one?
And it's funny,
So
that's kind of, we see that similar thinking in our industry still to this day, right? And I like, being so much of my background is in the dealership, right? Like I never got into what's a margin on a Neon versus a margin on a Town and Country versus a margin on a Durango, right? I didn't care.
Yeah.
I knew the type of customer, what they were like for each one, right? But it's so, it's funny when we all want to reminisce about the glory days of when you just kind of went out and lifted the hood and, tweaked the carburetor and, plugged the ignition wire back in and it smoothed right out, and they handed you, $5 or something, and they were happy as could be. And now we look at it and it's like, okay, we know what the margin's going to be from the time when that car comes in, right? What it can be. And if you spend too much time doing this and too much time doing that, and I understand that it's a necessary evil of this business, but I mean, I can see why people still reminisce so much about the old days, right? Where it wasn't, even if the margin was not great, you still spent the time just being a good person, doing what the right thing to do. I wish some of that could come back, but I'm scared that it's not gonna, because I mean, I can remember lots of customers that I spent 20, 30 minutes after their repair going through with them because, they didn't understand why their guy had said it needed X, Y, and Z, right? And I fix it with a broken wire or something like that, right? And
Yep.
they want to understand. And, I'm not getting paid for that 30 minutes, right? Like, I've done the repair. It was flat rate at the dealer. Like, I had some really good advisors that knew what I could do, and they'd let me do it. And I don't want to say that the advisors looked after me, but I mean, they kind of, right. I would help them out with things and they would help me out with things. And so it's never a situation of, that I couldn't talk to customers or I didn't enjoy it. It's just, how it is, right? The one customer can be just absolutely awesome, and the next 5 can be that nightmare. They've already judged you before you ever even have opened your mouth, and it's those kind of people. That's so old and archaic. I can't even stomach it, right? I just don't do it, and it's tough. So people look at me and they're like, "Don't let him talk to customers." And then I'll have 2 customers come in, like I had last week. They were moving from. I'm in Ontario. They were moving out of province. Had to buy a car that day, and they're like, so they bring a car over from the local dealer and I don't even rack it. I'm like, what is it? Oh, it's a Nissan Juke? No, don't buy that. And they're like, why? I'm like, because it's going to have a transmission problem probably when I drive it. I said it's one of their lowest selling. We're talking like a 3 or 4 year old Juke just out of warranty. I said they didn't sell a lot of them. The parts are expensive. Their serviceability of them is terrible. I wouldn't buy it. I said, and here's not only that, I probably wouldn't buy any Nissan that's out of warranty from that generation because expect to put a transmission in it within the year. There's a reason that it's traded. It needs a CVT. They all do. You just expect it. And so they take it and I drive it real quick. I don't even rack it. I just drive it and I'm like, yep, it's got a transmission issue. The light's not on yet, but you can feel it. If you've driven enough Nissan CVT like me, you know there's something wrong. So they're like, okay. So they go back and they come back with a little Mazda 3. I rack that car, go through everything. Okay, so the factory remote start doesn't work. Make sure you have them fix that before you buy it. Your wheel lock key for this car is missing. Make sure they give you that before make sure that, there's like 5 things on the car. It had supposedly been undercoated. Not at a dealer, up here we have what we call crown undercoating. And they had receipts in the glove box of the previous owner for crown. But when you got under the car, you never thought that it had been sprayed ever. And I said, okay, so when you get to where you're going, they're going to Halifax. Get to your local crown, show them the car, show them receipts, and tell them that you don't think it was sprayed well enough. And if they're going to spray it, have it sprayed heavy. Those 2 ladies left, and they were literally like, the one lady gave me a hug, and she's like, I wish we'd have found you years ago. And it's because they're just coming in because like we could get them in that day for a pre-trip or like a pre-safety inspection. Normally don't even charge $100 for it, right? It's not charged enough as what it should, but it's not necessarily a safety inspection as much as it's just like, is the car worth buying or not? And they were so happy that we didn't, we essentially looked at 2 cars for them, but only charged them to look at one and gave them more knowledge than you could tell anybody in the industry had yet to this point. Treated them like they weren't just, a walking checkbook, and instead treated them like, and we knew they were not going to be future customers because they're already leaving, right? We could have blown them off, Matt. We could have said, oh, yeah, okay, well, this is just blah, 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 and out the door. But the fact that I spent, 45 minutes going over with them and another 15 minutes talking about what to expect with the car they're going to buy and how to kind of navigate, like, okay, so, understand that this is not your dad's Mazda, that he had in 2002. This is a 2018. It's very different. Like, you have to appreciate this little thing and that little thing and how the technology makes it so great. And they were their minds were just like blown, right? With how much they'd never had that kind of interaction with somebody that actually seemed to genuinely care, that the buying experience, which I'm not even selling the car, right, Matt, was a positive experience. And I came home from that night realizing that, it's not about selling, right? It's about trying to make people understand that this industry is not this cesspool of deceit and distrust. There's a lot of people that have really good intentions that, for whatever reason, just they don't get to talk to the customer or it doesn't come out. And then there's a lot of people that are doing just some really shady stuff. But I mean, in the middle of us, there's a handful of us that don't get the accolades, that are just doing the right thing every day, right? And I didn't get, like, from a flat rate standpoint, would I have been the same way with that customer? No, I can't say that I would have, right? I would have spent maybe 10 minutes. And then I would have been, okay, I got to get back to whatever I'm doing, even if I had nothing to do, because you can't get another job, right, if you're yakking. But it is so much better for what I feel I have to bring to the industry if I don't work that way. You know what I mean? I don't see everything as just a margin and a financial opportunity.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff going on that's, depending on your perspective, is shady, but the intent isn't necessarily shady, to be intentionally deceitful. It's really incompetence or just ill-equipped, whether that is proper tooling, training, which would lead to incompetence. And sometimes when you say incompetence, it's so condescending. Just you're basically you're a complete idiot. You incompetent. But that's all of us have a level of incompetence, right? I mean, you make a bad call because you looked at some data and you decided that this component had to be bad. And it ends up it's not bad. Or it doesn't fix the car. Well, okay, that would be incompetence. Even if you're a very, very knowledgeable tech that fixes cars that the others can't.
Mm-hmm.
So, you start throwing around incompetence and people get really, really offended and their feathers get really, really ruffled. And yes, it can be meant to be running people down hard, but sometimes it's just the absolute truth. And you have just a large, large, large number of techs and shops out there that are wildly incompetent. And I don't know how serious they are about becoming incompetent. And then add on to that, incapable. Like they don't have the right tools for the job.
Mm-hmm. Huge difference, right?
And
It's
right.
that speaks to me about the motivation of what do they really want to achieve when this is done, right? Like it's one thing to say you just don't know, but you genuinely are invested in trying to do the problem solved. And then the other side of the coin is that I don't really care, right? If I don't fix everyone, as long as whatever the numbers line up at the end of the month and we get to keep the lights on, you know what I mean? And it's that's the tightrope to walk, right? Is how do you do them both? Because none of us are perfect. Not one of us. That
No.
there's just like Keith was mentioning last couple weeks ago. Every shop out there, I don't care who their name is, the top people in the industry have got a shelf with some parts on it that didn't fix the car.
Yep. Yep.
Right? And they didn't leave them in the car most of the time, right? And the customers certainly didn't pay for them because that's the right thing to do. Paul Danner talks about it all the time. But, to the customer, you alluded to how it can go out of there with, an ignition module, a set of wires, a tune-up, and a fuel system cleaning, and it's fixed. And the customer paid $1,000 and is happy. But really what it needed was just the coil. And they paid $80 for the coil in 15 minutes. And they're like, they can't believe that, that's no way it can be that, right? Why? Or even worse, it's a broken wire to, a coil. And, well, why can it only be that? And you charge me $100 to find that wire and fix it. You guys are ripping me off.
Yeah. And this will sound like I'm trying to run a dealer into the ground. And I'm really not. But this is the reality. Is a customer had I won't even say the name brand because it really doesn't matter. But it had all the Christmas tree lights on the instrument cluster. So they take it to the local dealer, and thousands of dollars later, it's still not fixed. It still has this Christmas tree of lights on, and wherever they were, somehow, some way, they get my name. Doesn't matter, but it ends up at our shop. They purposely didn't bring it to our shop to begin with because they had heard we're really expensive. Like as expensive as the dealer or more expensive than the dealer.
Yep.
So I lucked out. I mean, I don't know if it was lucked out. It was a network issue. I had a whole bunch of modules not communicating. And you probably know what brand it is when I tell you the issue was a terminal tension at a connector.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it basically took out maybe not half the network. It's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but it took down a large number of modules on the network. It's kind of amazing it actually ran.
Right.
But 2 new terminals, I don't think it probably needed any of those modules. And there you sit. That dealer soaked that customer for thousands of dollars. Did not fix the car. And I spent, we'll just say the better part of 2 hours to find it and fix it. Because I don't want to make it sound like I was a superstar. It's just, it wasn't that hard to find. Especially, I guess I'll put over Auto a little bit. The module topography on the MS series, I mean, the Maxis series, that helps a lot. When you can see these modules on this bus after about here aren't talking and then a wiring schematic, you kind of have an idea where to go.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not like, Matt was so freaking smart. It's just experience doing that, training,
And that
lots of training,
and that
lots of
always
friends.
yeah. That always irked me when people when they come to me and they lambast about oh, it's been at the dealer and they can't fix it, or you've seen me get right angry with people. It's like dealer techs can't fix anything, or dealer techs of this, or dealer techs of that. And I get really still offended because at my core, I spent so many years at so many different dealerships, right? And I know that there's a lot of us in the dealers that genuinely want to see the car fixed, right? We genuinely,
Oh, yeah.
but we're not given enough diag time. The guys at the dealer are not. It's a completely different environment, right? And I used to say
Yep.
all the time, if you've never worked it, you don't understand it. You don't know what the pressure is like, where you can have a service manager that's watching the oil changes back up and he needs to get them in the shop. And he could have, one tech on a transmission job, one tech on an engine job, one tech on a diag, and they're going to stop them to go do something absolutely asinine that makes them nothing anyway. And you just took the progress train and drove it right off the tracks. It's done. Your train of thought is screwed for the next hour. So I've always felt that there's a lot more techs that get shade thrown at them. And it's not that they can't fix it, because everybody that knows me a long time has said, I will not invest my own time for free into a customer's repair. I will not do it. It is against my core value, right? If I make a judgment and it's wrong, I spent many nights at the dealer till 8 or 9 o'clock fixing a car that I screwed up my diag on, and I couldn't let it go. And I was like, I gotta know. I worked a lot of hours for free till I learned it, right? Till I fixed it, because I didn't want to be just the typical, right? The stereotype. But so when people start to say this kind of tech can't do this and this kind of tech is better, there is no way you can know, right? You have to look at the shop's culture, how they pay. And so I believe that there's a lot of techs in a dealership that are genuinely really good and can fix the car. It's just where some shops take the problem car in, they have a rapport with the customer, they spend 3-4 hours on it to get to the problem. They give the customer a bill for maybe 2 hours. The labor rate is a lot lower. The customer gets, a $200 bill, one broken wire fixed, one terminal tension problem corrected, whatever. And to them, you are incredible, right? At the dealership, their door rate could be 50% higher. The tech is flat rate, right? It's always, well, they've authorized an hour. I don't want to call them again for another hour, right? It's always, you're at 2 hours, you still don't know. Oh man, like we're backing up with work here, and I don't think I can call them again for hour 3. You see what I mean, Matt? Like, we know the difference because we both work both sides of it. That the one scenario just leads to a much more trusting transaction, right? Where the dealer always has their prices are what they are. Their overhead is what it is. But there's so many times that they're scared to say to the customer, listen, we need more time. And then time is one thing, right? If you don't necessarily have the tech to be able to put on that problem, you might rethink about, should you even bring that car in? It's like the thread that went around last week where the guy was talking about, oh, what was it? The ABS fault. And they had to bring a field service tech in to fix it. And that always really just irritated me when people, start to talk about how those dealership mechanics can't fix anything. Because I mean, I've always said, if I got paid some of the time that I've seen, if I had some of the time allotted that I've seen some cars get towed out of shops and get brought to me at the dealer to fix, I could have fixed anything. You know what I mean? And it's about, at that point, it's how do we invest the customer's money the best way? So, I believe that, yeah, it's hard to find somebody like yourself, Matt, that's so skilled, or the superstars of the industry. We talk about them, right? The guys that can do anything, Brendan Stecklers and Brian and Paul, and those guys that are known for problem solving, right? But I believe that more of us out here, I guess I pose that question. What do you think? Like, do you think that there are more of them out there that can do it? or do you really think that it's gotten to where it's going to be just kind of, I don't want to say elite status or elite ability, but what do you think about it?
I think it's a small percentage of people because, I mean, everybody I know that you would call that elite level, whatever that means. But I think we know when we say that, we kind
Yeah.
of know who we're talking about. And you hate to start naming names just because you're going to start forgetting those names, forgetting people that
Yeah.
very much deserve
You'll leave
to
somebody
be
out.
in that group. But, you know, the Justin Morgans and the Pedro de la
Yeah.
Torres and the Keith Perkins, you know, and we could go on and on and on, right? This
Yep.
massive friends group. And of course they're smart. They have to be smart to a certain degree, but the biggest thing is like the personal
Mm-hmm.
investment they have is tremendous. And I think that's the difference is they put, so yes, they have to have the brains, right? You could study chess as long as you want, but if you don't have a certain intelligence or intelligence type, you're only going to go so far. You're only going to
Yep.
get so good. Somebody else that's kind of got a little bit more of a knack for it, it's, you know, they just, certain concepts occur to them more naturally and make sense to them on a level that
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to you. They put forth that same amount of effort. They're going to be way
Mm-hmm.
better than you. And I think that's the same case here is like whatever it is, not so much the intelligence number, you know, their IQ is this. It's not so much that as much as their intelligence is really strong in certain areas of mechanical aptitude and, you know, maybe certain like cognitive reasoning and spatial recognition types of stuff that they're very adept at. And then putting in hours and hours and hours of study,
Mm-hmm.
networking. You know, I like when Keith was talking about when he was working for a shop, like he would stay after work every night to work on cars or cars that were still there that he had to figure it out. He'd go back through and how could I have figured this out faster, or what could I have done different? You know, even to the point of bolting on the old bad parts to
Yep.
try to
Yep.
re-diagnose it. That's a terrific level of dedication that most I don't know do that.
I
They
never
just
had it
don't.
because
Or
when I would get there and it was like you were there at the dealer at 8 o'clock, right? And the salespeople are still walking around, but you're there fixing the car. At that point, it was just about fixing the car, right? You know what I mean? It wasn't a learning opportunity. I mean, it was a learning opportunity. I learned a ton, but it wasn't at that point. It was just like, I need to get this car done because I'm behind this many jobs or this many hours. And I don't really, yeah, I know to check there next time. But you know what I mean? I didn't develop a process improvement through that learning expertise. I just got my butt handed to me. It got chewed. I had to make it up on the next cars, right? I had to get the work done. I had to get a paycheck. And I think that has hindered my career, that mindset that, you know, I don't ever think, put the old part back in and look at it. I've mentioned it, you know, the last one I had was a Mazda that was a pretty interesting thing. And, you know, I can't remember who I shared it with about what was going on. I ended up having a skewed reading to the fuel tank pressure sensor through a connection underneath the trunk was causing the mass airflow to be all wonky. The oxygen sensor was an open loop. It would barely run, barely shift. It was all kinds of screwed up. All because of this connector at the back is full of green corrosion and it was water. Like you could pull the connector apart and pour water out of it. And, you know, so it ended up being that we just literally put a pigtail in. That's all it needed to fix. That's it. And it's like, so I had a few hours into it and I got it done. You know, cheap repair for the customer other than labor. No major parts, you know, and I'm done. But we're already a day behind when we had promised it because they, you know, they figured it's just a mass airflow and it would have been out the door. We didn't put a mass airflow in it. We didn't shotgun a part in this. But because it ended up being there a day longer, they need it back right away, right? So I didn't even have the time to go back and kind of stick the old pigtail back in, recreate the failure, and start to document everything. And I wish I did, but you know, there's always that get the car done mentality.
yeah, and I don't know that that can be stressed enough that going back to the vehicle issue that was at the dealer that they put a lot of parts on it. There seems to be that misnomer of the dealer, like, you guys have access to training, we don't. You have access to information, we don't. And a lot of times it's the opposite. In some cases, it's worse. You have less information at your fingertips. Like, the service information is the same, looking up wiring diagrams and stuff like that. Like training, sometimes the training documents are worse than what we get in the aftermarket. This is what was interpreted or given to us by the manufacturer. This is all you need to know. And the car sets codes. You follow this trouble tree, do what you're told, and you'll fix the car. And that's the mentality. And there's no scopes. And if there are scopes, they don't really give you enough time to use them anyways. There's no cool tools for, a network analysis or, whatever. We could go down a rabbit hole with that, but it's just this misunderstanding that you guys, the dealer techs, have such access that we don't. And a lot of times that's not the case. A lot of times we have more information about the fundamental operation of these systems than they do. And we're in a different environment too, right? Because we're probably not getting 2/10 to diagnose. If it had taken me all day to figure that truck out, I would have got paid. I would have got paid for the day, and we would have billed what we thought we could have billed for. And part of my point too with that scenario or example wasn't so much like I fixed something the dealer couldn't. It was it was perspective, because that bill ended up being maybe $300. The customer was ecstatic with us and ticked off at the dealer. But if they would have came to us first and it was the same exact thing, but no other parts were put on it, and I find these wires, or not, these terminal tension issues, and I fixed the car for $300, they're livid with me because it was $300 for these two little terminals. We're gouging you, or you're gouging us. How dare you? So that was kind of the whole point of that, is this perspective thing. And then like I was saying, my instincts too is I went to the 2-year college basically to get my parents off my back. I saw a scan tool the first day on the tour of the shop, and then I was whipped. Like, that's what I wanted to do. What does that do? And the technology stuff kind of sucked me in. And that my first job when I was going to school was at a Ford dealer, kind of new car prep. And then they would let me do some other stuff. And one of the things was I got to assemble the SBDS, which was their big, what do you want to call it? It was a diagnostic system. It kind of worked. It would had harnesses, not that there were so many different ones for Ford, but it would tee into the harness between the engine control module and the rest of the vehicle, the wire harness. And it could do pin by pin analysis, and it had lab scope functions, and kind of almost like guided fault finding in a way. You could do fuel pressure tests where you would hook up the transducer and it would measure the fuel pressure and tell you if it was good, and it would have you wait for a minute or whatever to watch bleed down, and if it didn't pass that, it recommended a fuel pump, stuff like that. And there's a flight record function, stuff like that. So anyways, once in a while they'd throw me a car to work on other than prepping. And this thing had a kind of a, what would they call that? Because I don't want to give it away necessarily, like a fish bite.
Yeah.
I think that's what they called it. And the service manager told me, like, well, it's probably the transmission, and here, change the transmission fluid and put a little bit of this limited slip stuff in the transmission fluid, because it's probably the torque converter not solenoid, but the torque converter clutch. So I did it. The stuff stinks like you wouldn't believe, but I do it, go out, does the same thing. And he's kind of like, well, it's getting to the end of the day. The other guys aren't going to take it on. So, mess around with it, whatever. And, I drove it. I had it on the SBDS. I was looking at ignition, and I had no idea what I was looking at. And the thing doesn't give you ignition waveforms, those bar graphs, which turns out was like worthless. But I just had this gut feeling like this is ignition. This this was a misfire, and it was plug wires. And so I went, and parts department gave me this was back when you could do like ask for the parts and they would give them to you and you could try them out, and if they didn't work, give them back. And I put the plug wires on, and I could see, I think it was number 5 cylinder on a 4.6 liter. I could see where it's burned through the boot. And so put that on, fix the car, and they're kind of like, holy cow. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of stuff that I stunk up the joint. Terrible.
Yeah.
And so in retrospect, I was trying to figure out, like, was that a good environment or a bad environment? And I think when it really boiled down to it, it was a bad environment. But it led to the job so I delivered parts for a little while at CarQuest, which ended up being really good for me because it kind of gave me time to process stuff that I had learned in school, learned watching at the dealership, got my butt handed to me at the dealership. Got to watch other mechanics kind of work, form relationships with them, banter. And then they wanted me to go full-time parts at CarQuest, and I couldn't do it. I wanted to finish up school. I really didn't picture myself being a counterman or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So I ended up at Tires Plus for a little while, which is tires and brakes and alignments, and I hated every second of it. I don't know why I took the job. It was probably the most money I'd made for quite a while, even when I went to the next shop. But that's the next shop after that was Preeb's Repairs, an independent repair shop. The owner had a really, really good reputation as being a really good mechanic. And he found out I liked electrical and drivability and all that. And that's all I wanted to do. And I got there, and he's like, you can have it. And they let me struggle. They let me ride the struggle bus a lot.
Key.
And yeah, and I'm torn about that, right? Because for me, it worked out really well. But, I would get there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would stay until 10, 11 at night. And I would just keep fighting and learning and pouring through manuals, pouring through trade regs. There wasn't a whole lot of training just yet. I had fought for that to get some sort of training. But one of those magazines was Underhood Service. And John Thornton had a column in there every other month. He'd share it with somebody else, and I would read these articles, and they'd just blow my mind. And it was between that and the third year of technical school I went to that changed everything. That changed everything. So I'd be on the struggle bus all the time right out of my 2-year, and then after that third year, that was probably like the light bulb moment was up there. Coming back to the shop and being able to run out of work. Like before, they might only schedule me a couple cars a day, 3 cars a day. And then when I came back, they had a hard time keeping me busy. You could knock those out
in substantially faster time.
Yeah, stuff that was tripping me up before wasn't tripping me up anymore. And part of it was the schooling. The schooling helped with electrical immensely. I don't know what it was. I think it was kind of the hands-on portion. I think it was just the way they taught. It was a lot more hard-nosed. A lot more probably reminiscent of how my dad was with me. Just kind of like, come on, use your brain. Think about it. Nope, you're not right. Just go over there. Go work it out. Think about it. Come back later. And for whatever reason, that worked for me. And then, coming back and be able to knock that stuff out. That was probably my light bulb moment. It was when these cars that used to just kill me weren't killing me anymore. There was definitely cars that would kill me, but they were usually just totally jacked up, or it was hard to be overly critical of myself on
because
beat up on them.
Probably can we say that they were maybe not much longer for the motoring world, and they probably should have been retired as a piece of transportation. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I worked on I still work on too many of them, but I mean, it's getting better now. So.
Yeah, but I wrestle with the whole thing about, how long do you let somebody struggle, and how important was it, and how to recognize this investment, like that they're struggling now, but I can see they don't make the same mistake twice, or I can see that they're staying late, or they're going home and they're spending a lot of their own time studying and trying to get better. It's around that time I found IATN, and that you talk about like aha moments. Like there's aha moments up at the implement, and then a big aha moment happened up at that third year of college. It was Alexandria Technical College. They don't have the program in there anymore, but it was third year. You had to graduate a 2 year. Sorry, you had to graduate a 2 year just to get in. And all it was electrical drivability on GM Ford Chrysler. They had factory scan tools. I'd never used a factory scan tool before. I didn't know what I was missing. And then I saw, and it's like, oh my, and then had to use lab scopes. You had to use the lab scope. It just opened up so much. It just so many aha moments, so many just, I don't know, the hair on the back of your neck stands up.
So you did you kind of get involved on IATN with like, I mean, I know some of the people that you I don't want to say aligned yourself with, but I mean, they kind of maybe mentored you or saw something in you that was like, okay, this young man's, got a bright future. Did you immediately just kind of go in and start to, because I know when I was there, I lurked. I didn't hardly say anything. I mostly hung out in like the, back here, you remember it when it was like, if it was a Chevrolet or a Ford or a Chrysler, tech topics, right? And I would just read that all night long. And then if I saw one that I thought I knew the answer for, I would just say, hey, I've seen when they go out of time, they do this. And, but I never like the in-depth stuff that I saw, Harvey discuss, like Harvey Chan and Alvin Moore and so many other people, John Thornton, guys that were talking a lot. I just read. I didn't say anything. I just read. And I remember seeing you and Harvey discussing different things in there, and I was like, okay. And what was cool is Harvey was Canadian, right? So I mean, he's and I was
Vancouver.
like, because it wasn't like he was the only Canadian on IATN, but I mean, there was not a lot of us, right? And certainly that didn't hold the esteem that they had for Harvey, right? And I remember seeing it was like Harvey Chan, Canadian Tire store number, whatever it was in Vancouver. And I'm thinking, Canadian Tire, like, because they do not have the best reputation in up here in Canada in our industry, not even close. They are the biggest player on the block by double to any. The next closest might be Midas, and Midas wouldn't even be a blip on their radar, right, in terms of store count. And I remember thinking, wow, if they've got a guy like Harv that understands that level. And I remember he was like, when I would see him, he would talk about hybrid and EV and stuff like this, right? And it's in its early days. And I'm thinking, there's a guy at a Canadian Tire that actually like knows as much about the Toyota EV, or back then the Prius, as a Toyota tech would. That's amazing to me, right? And I just, I would see you guys discussing different things, and I'm like, man, if every store had a Harvey, right? What an amazing, like they were already a huge player. They'd have put everybody else out of business. The level that he had, that he just showed through those few posts that I can remember, astounded me. It was incredible, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was a Snap-on beta tester, and he was a flat rate tech. I mean, he was a flat rate tech for the longest time. Some diag, but just the typical Canadian Tire work. That's what he did. And he had a knack for the diagnostic stuff, so they would give him a little bit more, and I think they took care of him. A, because he was pretty good at it. B, I think he was just a good guy to have in the shop. He got along with everybody. And I think IATN helped show him too. And this would have been slightly before me, what else was really out there, and gave him an avenue to find more information. And then the guy was, I mean, he's the smartest person as I've ever met. I mean, he is as smart a person as I've ever met, and could retain unbelievable amounts of information. But better yet, he was really good at just, I think it's like that spatial reasoning, and that he could think about stuff and think about it, and it would make sense. And then he was pretty good at like sharing that. But his way of doing it a lot of times was setting you up. He'd ask you a question and he'd be setting you up the whole time. When I first joined IATN probably would have been, I mean, it would have been really
So
late
you were in before
90s.
me for a long, yeah.
And yeah, and when I first joined up, I mean, I read some of the forums, but I found the
Mhm.
chat room. And I think I was liked, but not generally liked well by the people I would end up looking up to the most, because I think I was very, is laissez-faire the right word? I mean, it's just, or phrase, it's, we're here to help everyone out. And it was just like really after this wholesome type of atmosphere. And they were a
Mhm.
little more hardened. And so I would butt heads really hard with the Matthew
Yes, I remember that's
Ragsdales and Harvey a little bit, and Tim Lena, who else? John Luttenberger and I would go at it a lot. Oh my God. And it was probably that way for a few years. And then one night, it was specifically one night, I remember
mhm.
everything changed. I was desperately trying to help this guy figure out this. It was a Ford pickup that was misfiring on one bank under acceleration. And I knew what was wrong with the truck, but I was trying to help him
Yeah.
figure it out on his own. And he went on a tirade about what an a-hole I was, that I knew what was wrong with that
Yeah, and you
truck and
wouldn't
I
feed
wouldn't
him the
just
answer.
tell him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was this realization that I ended up writing these really long response after that guy got booted. So Lloyd Jones was a
Mhm.
moderator. He booted the guy. And I just remember writing this really long, it's not a post, it's in chat, but this response basically apologizing profusely to Harvey, Ragsdale, Burnclaw, Kemper, Tim Lena, John Lottenberger. I'm sure I'm forgetting a few others, that they were they would help you,
Yeah.
but you had to jump through their hoops. And I apologized profusely to them because it didn't make sense until that night. And that changed everything. That changed everything. All of a sudden, it's a whole nother new world opened up.
Yeah.
John Riggle was another one. And I just remember, not that they're all of a sudden so much nicer to me, but I took everything they did much differently. I didn't take it so personally. I don't think they treated me any better. They maybe even treated me quote unquote worse, but I didn't take it that
You'd
way
made it
anymore.
past the hazing phase, right? And you're now kind of into you're still the young kick around kid on the team, but at least you're on the team. You know what I mean? We're gonna let you.
Yeah, yeah. And I kind of saw stuff from their perspective. Like it all of a sudden just made sense. Like,
Mhm.
oh, that's okay. Yeah, that's what I was. That's what I was doing.
I
And
always
oh
tried to
wow,
do,
okay,
because me, my history in the Facebook groups is I always tried to try and bring what IATN had been about into a Facebook groups. And I've realized now that it is never going to be. It was IATN was a very special thing, and it was, it's not what it used to be, and it's never going to be that again. We'll probably in this industry never have anything exactly like that again, because I didn't want.
yeah, because you had the best of the best seeking each other out. The guys who we were talking about just earlier, where you get done with work and you went home, and then you spent your time on work to get better, and that was the place. And for a while, it was really the creme de creme. I mean, the cream of the crop. They were
And
the
I
best
just
of the
always wanted to
best.
see people, like, because I believe in that, if you teach a man to fish versus if he can, if you teach a man to fish, he can feed himself, right? If you give a man a fish, you feed him for one day. And, and that's what I always just tried to bring is it's like, and dude, I've been lit up, more times than I can count. People have just been infuriated with me. Why don't you just give them the answer? Well, it's not Identifix, right? Like, first of all, we're all here out of our own
Right.
volunteer. We're not getting paid for this. So if I have the answer, I want you to understand how I got it, right? And I might have just got it by some fluke thing, or maybe there was a process to how I got the answer, but it's more important that I share the process than I share the answer, right? That's what I always try to get. And no, the newer generation just does not care. And I get it where they're coming from. They just want that nightmare car fixed and gone. Totally understand it. But Brian and I talked, Brian Pollock, all the time of, it takes a process. We have to refine our process of how we do it. My core belief is that if we refine the process on how we do this job, this industry then changes 1000%. I think that's what it's
Yes.
going to take. And it's a slog, man, to try and get everybody to, because we all are different, right? We all do things different. Your brain works different than mine. My brain works different than Brian's, than Paul's, than Brendan's and Keith's. And it's just Matthew Scundrich. It's like, there's another cat that's like, he's on another level of how, when you talk to him, and, he's not above calling me and asking me like, hey, have you had one of these when I was at Nissan? I'm working on a brand new car. He's working on a brand new car. And I'm like, Matt, like, I've only been here 2 months, dude. You're already ahead of me in your experience on this. Like, I can't help you. But it's been fascinating to me to see the different ways that people approach the job and they approach Diag. And it's like, oh, if so many guys are so much better than me. And it's just like, I try to take little nuances of what they do. But I realize that like all of us are all really good. It's just, some people, it's like you said, it goes back to instincts. People go to me and they go, oh, you're one of the smartest guys. I've talked to them like, man, I just have the most incredible luck. And then I've been doing this a long time now, so I have a lot of experience on what stuff feels like. And then I just have a really good, honed intuition, right? I can kind of drive it and go, it's not that, right? Like do I know what it is? No, but I know that it's not what you think it is. So it's not your transmission. It's you do have a misfire, or you got a converter that's plugging up, right? Or something like that, or the timings that you can tell by driving it. And that, for me, I don't end up always get to take that car and see what's actually wrong, because as soon as it's not going to be fixed with a tune-up, a lot of it, the customer's like, okay, well then we were gonna trade this thing anyway, and you flog it, right? And that can get frustrating. But I got to remember that it's like, I didn't waste a ton of their money doing a tune-up just because they wanted it, right? They come in and ask for a tune-up and do a tune-up on this. I still, to this day, don't do that. If the customer comes in and wants a tune-up, I go, why do you want a tune-up? Oh, it's down on power?
Yep.
Okay, that's probably not going to fix it, right? Like, let's spend some time and try to figure out what it's actually doing. Let's look at some trims and let's look at some codes and go on from there. And financially, that's not always been the best method. And I can still see shops now where they struggle with that, right? Because it's like, I don't want you to do Diag. I just want you to fix my car. Right?
Yeah.
They
Oh, man, and you're looking at him like, "Do you hear
Yeah.
yourself?"
I can remember my stepdad's parents. So, for all intents and purposes, grandparents of mine, they had an old Crown Vic. I want to say around, it probably might have been 96, 97, 98, somewhere around there. 4.6, right? And I can remember that it was having this issue where it would stall out, lack of power and everything else. And they're from a rural community, farmers in the family. And they would go in and say, okay, this Crown Vic, it needs a fuel pump. Put a fuel pump in it. And the dealer back there puts a fuel pump in it. And it was an intermittent acting up thing. It didn't fix it. And then he went in and he's like, well, they had another look at it. I had them change both upstream oxygen sensors. It didn't fix it. So this went on for like months, Matt. Finally, we're talking at Christmas time or something. Like, so did you get the car fix? Yeah. Took it into one day and they changed the ignition coil. And I'm like, that is, so we're talking something that I remember from 25 years ago. And that's sticking in my head going, oh, you could have put a coil in for so much less money than what you paid to have a fuel pump done. And I don't know the whole scenario, like, what they would have charged or whatever, but I know that dealership, if they'd have come to them, that customer, and said, I want my fuel pump changed, they'd have done exactly what the customer said. And this is the thing that I struggle with sometimes. And it's like, even when I work with other managers sometimes, is that they don't get it, is that like, I'm not interested in doing something when I know it's not going to fix the car, that's going to leave people jilted and upset, because I know, sure as the sun's going to come up tomorrow, they're going to be back in your service drive. I'm going to be back up here in front of them, and they're going to be now upset. And I don't want that. So I got labeled a lot of times. I think a lot of us in this industry do when we say, that's not going to fix it. I don't want to do it. Well, that's a bad attitude. What's wrong with you? Why am I paying you? But
Yeah.
we have the best, like, it's not that we don't have the customer's best intentions at mind, you know, but when I think about, for instance, like that post last week about that Volkswagen, that guy, you know, he fixed the oil consumption problem with a set of spark plugs. He didn't fix anything, right? But you know, that tech in that dealership is doing their due diligence. They're doing what they're supposed to. They're letting the customer know, yeah, this thing's got a problem. The customer doesn't want to hear that. So the customer then has to lambast us all like we're a bunch of thieving crooks. I've always been that type where I would tell that customer, you know what, you go pound sand. I'm not going down this rabbit hole with you because I don't feel good about it. Do I need to make the hour that tune-up's going to pay? No, I don't. Right? Not if it's going to mean that when you're back in 6 months' time and it's doing it again or fouled up the plugs and you're going to call me everything under the sun. I'd rather you call me lazy. I'd rather you call me difficult than you call me a crook. I'm not interested in that conversation anymore. Right? So I struggle with that still. It's so, I don't know if I'll ever get out from underneath it, right? It just drives me crazy. You know, we all want to do what is right. I believe that 100% as I've started to network with more and more people. And I lambasted some people in the day, man, that I was just like, you know, and there are bad apples for sure. But there are more of us out here that want to do the right thing. But it's the circumstances or the culture or whatever you want to call it that's not allowing us to. And I think until we get that changed in the industry, the future's scary, man. It really is, right? Like, you know, I mean, there's guys coming along like Harvey, right? We see them. They're young cats that are just brilliant. But I mean, you know, I don't know. I don't think they have the longevity because I think it's going to get to them. You know what I mean? When we think about some of the people that have been in the industry and have already gotten out, I know of good friends of mine that made the master status and now they've taken completely different jobs. They're out of the industry. They just can't. They can't survive it, right? It's not even about the money. It's just the way some days you come home and you're made to feel. It's really hard, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ragsdale, he's as good at tech, diag tech, as I've ever known. And I think he works for heavy equipment.
And I can remember
that's
his
where the
name
money's at.
on ITN all the time, and it was like, that dude's smart, really smart.
Oh, dude, he was super, super, super smart. Either for a for real deal photographic memory or darn close. And access. He had access that a lot of us would have killed for. I mean, I think he went to a really good trade school or technical college, and then I think he worked at a Nissan dealer for a while, which ended up, I think, helping him because some of the wording they would use, like base fuel schedule, that was something I never really heard of. But that's a Nissan thing, and that helped him. And then he ends up with Burnclaw working for Randy Burnclaw's shop, and that guy, you know, Randy's wife, I think, is a chemist, and he's best friends with Jim Kemper, who worked for the Colorado State Department of Health, and he's an engineer and he's a genius. So Randy's super smart, maybe, you know, complimentarily meaning a genius. And then I think Kemper legitimately is. I think Burnclaw's wife legitimately is. And they know all about, you know, SAE documents and studying patents. And they have the equipment investments. They also have access to the Colorado State Department of Health facilities. I mean, man, you talk about a perfect scenario for creating just a juggernaut of a technician. There it is. I mean, it hits on so many things. His own unique personal skills and attributes, and then the environment and culture he worked in. It's just wow, no wonder. And then his reward is there's more money in fixing heavy equipment. And I'm sure he's freaking brilliant at it. Absolutely brilliant at it. Another one, like a friend of mine, he was a Napa Automotive Technician of the Year, I think. ASE Technician of the Year. Okay. Tom Myers worked for independent shops in Chicago, he'd have to buy his own uniforms or at least rent them. And I'm pretty sure he's flat rate and all that. Never had a retirement. I don't think he had health insurance, but he may not have needed it because his wife had it. But still, I don't think it was ever offered. And he ends up moving more out east from Chicago, and he's working for a shop out there. And it's kind of all the same type of
winning
deal.
a national award as one of the top in your industry, recognized, for your ability to do what it is, repair the automobile well, not just get it cobbled back together, but actually fix it well, like dealer level repair, right? Or above that. And you're working for somebody that you've got to supply your own uniforms. Like this. And the industry wonders why it has a retention problem and an attraction problem to the next generation.
But you know what he does now? Well, he got a job. So he went to an interview. I know a friend of a friend name dropped him, and it's a forklift dealership, multi-stores. I don't know if you would necessarily consider that a franchise or a conglomerate or whatever, but they have multiple dealerships. He gets hired on as a forklift or fork truck technician, and I told him you'll be shop foreman in a year. And he laughs me off, like, yeah, whatever. Be lucky if I figure out how to drive one of these stupid things. Right? But he doesn't have to buy his uniforms. They provide his uniforms. I think they give him money for boots, and they, work the system a little bit. They pay for eyeglasses if they're safety. But nowadays you can get really nice looking safety glasses that you clip the sides on and whatever. So they take care of that. I still don't know if he needed the health insurance or took their health insurance, but for the first time in his life, he had a 401k. He had never had one before, at least employer contributions and stuff like that. So he's digging it. And turns out a lot of these fork trucks have like Chevy V8 engines in them. So he's immediately fairly comfortable and immediately above everyone else on how they work, what to do. He's got a picoscope. Boom. He calls me up. I don't know. I mean, we talk periodically throughout the year, but he calls me up and he goes, well, you were wrong. Oh, yeah? He's like, yeah, I'm shop foreman. I did it in 11 months. So I was off by a month. But now he's the director of like training. So he goes around and trains all their techs at all these different dealers, and he takes on all the hard case trucks or, forklifts, fork trucks, and he's killing it. So yeah, he wins this award, and his reward was we drove him out.
Exactly.
What?
And imagine, because I've seen that more than once. I can remember when I was trying to get on at the Goodyear plant here, and the Goodyear plant was full of guys that had left Automotive to go work in the plant to fix the machineries that was in the plant, whether it was a stationary, it becomes more like millwright work or whatever, but it was just like, they're all old techs. And, isn't it funny when you can go and so you get out of the automotive industry and you say you go to work to equipment or something, right? And there's so many guys that are trainers, and you're like, well, what did you do before you got with the company? I was an automotive mechanic. And they say it like it's, I was just an automotive mechanic. And immediately our brain thinks of one thing. But when you start to dig into the background and you start to ask them some questions or something, it's like, no, they weren't just the typical mechanic, right? They were the guy that it never seemed to be that hard for them, right? And that's why they're training somebody else. And that's this industry, we tend to chew those people up, and then they go somewhere where they get appreciated, and they're trying to bring, the process to a different industry, a way of fixing the machine, a way of diagnosing the machine, a way of looking after the fleet, whatever you want to call it. This industry has to stop doing that. We have to stop pushing these guys out just based on, the guy you're speaking of last week, Michael, the flat rate master. Like, I hope to have him on, and the idea that as we get older and we slow down, our value becomes less to the people that are employing us, to me is just the most ridiculous thing you can think about. And I can't put my head on it. Where else in anything in life, it happens except in sports. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was thinking sports and I suppose like
Well, yeah,
modeling, you know, right?
yeah.
I mean, it's the only other thing I can really think of
You
like
know,
that.
like Wayne Gretzky couldn't lace him up tomorrow. I mean, he could lace him up tomorrow and go out on on his skates and you know he could put the moves on quite a few of the guys still and go around them. You know what I mean, and make it down the ice. But he won't move as fast, right? He won't. His reflexes won't be there. This industry, it's like, oh, you used to turn 60. Damn it, you're down to 45. And I pay you what? You're gone. Like I can't. The wealth of
Yep.
knowledge that we have probably fired out of this industry, or drove them out, or whatever term you want to use, it must rival anything else. There must be nothing that even comes close to what we have probably done to some of the smartest people in this industry. And I don't care if it's just like, you know, they worked at a dealer, they only knew that product, right? And they just got sick of it and they drove them out of there or whatever, or management change. You still took somebody that knew everything that parked on that lot and knew it inside and out, frontwards to backwards, both sides. Knew the operating system, knew the common failures, knew how the shortcuts, and you run that guy out of there or girl because of a dollar amount. It's so ridiculous. That like I'm not saying that they have to be put on a pedestal and should be allowed to do nothing and produce nothing, but there's like the idea that you're training your replacement. I I'm still on the fence about that because you know I've mentored a lot of techs and I have taught them a lot, but I'll come right out and say it. I haven't taught them everything that I know. Right? If I have a refined process, I don't
Yeah,
necessarily teach them my process because I have to protect
yeah,
what I had to donate to get, because if I give it away, and I saw it happen, you know, I've been through it. Everybody that says, "Oh, you shouldn't," you know, you should be training them. Well, I'm wondering if you've worked in the same kind of places that I have, because when I started to show them little things, then everybody started to do what I did, and then there wasn't as much for me, right? And we're talking about production, we're talking
yep.
about money. We all have to keep that in mind, that you know most of us are still going to judge us on what we produce. And
Yeah, and it's a very military type of a thought process, training somebody, training
mhm,
your successor, because you're if that's going to happen, okay, I suppose on one extreme you died in battle, but the other is you got promoted and somebody trained you to succeed them because they're moving on up this chain or this ladder. They're moving up this ladder. Well, in our most repair shops, if you're kind of one of the main techs, one of the main line techs, if you will, where do you get promoted to? Where else is there to go? So you're training someone to be to succeed you or replace you, if you will, but you're not necessarily getting promoted.
right,
Now it doesn't make
exactly.
sense. So like what I'm doing is, I need help in my area. There's too much stuff, too much time I get pulled away on, for lack of a better description. We'll just say
Hmm.
easy diags that I have to do those. So I want to train somebody to kind of take more and more of that stuff off my plate. And if it gets more complex, of course I'll help you out. Or if I have to, I'll take over and you get back to this other, the other stuff. But while I'm doing that, I'm also trying to learn more and more about other things. Like, currently it's a lot of keys, immobilizer, EEPROM. I guess I've been doing programming for quite a while, but maybe delving into other tools, scan
Hmm.
tools, car lines, and then
Yeah.
ADOS. So as I'm moving into that stuff, I need somebody to kind of take over what I was doing so I have time to dedicate to that. Plus, I'm in this managerial role. Like, a lot of the marketing stuff's on me and I
Yeah.
do not have time to do it. If I'm working on
You're
marketing
not
stuff,
fixing.
guess when I'm doing it?
Yeah.
I'm sitting at home. And yeah, my hourly pay doesn't reflect that. I don't get to stay
Hmm.
punched in. So I gotta hope my ideas work so that the shop profits, and I'll see it in a profit sharing check. But the idea is not. I have a place to migrate towards. I don't think a lot of techs have that. There's nowhere for
because
them
I
to
was going to
go.
say
It's
this is kind of this will be your shop one day, right? Like you're currently an employee, but that's kind of is not your end goal. Is that it will be yours?
I mean, last time I checked, that was the goal. But the shop owner bought a different house, so we'll see how that affects things. Yeah, that's what I did. That same look and nodding my head. It's like, I wonder. So we'll see.
Remember, Matt,
listen.
If a shop owner wants to buy a boat, we are not supposed to resent them or judge them for the boat that they buy. Okay, that's what somebody is. A mutual friend explained that to me. That we're like, they've worked really hard to buy that boat.
I cannot stress enough how much I sympathize and am happy that they got to buy this house. So they were looking at building a new house, and I thought that was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. The prices they were getting to build this house is like, this made no sense. If you actually go through with this is 100% ego. 100% ego. There's so many more houses that you could buy that are bigger, nicer, on more property than this new house. But I think you're looking for some sort of, I don't even know, recognition or pat on the back.
Their dream house. It's somebody else's dream house. That's how I see, the real estate side of things is like when I see people that are like, I want to build a house, they want to build their dream house. And I think what is hard for me to wrap my head around is like when I remember people doing that as I was younger, it was like that was something they started to do almost at retirement age. You know what I mean? Like it was the kids had already gone to school, started their own careers, and then they kind of took that on as it's like, okay, so our first home, the market went really good. We paid that mortgage off, we've had it paid off 15 years, say, and we'll sell that home. It'll make us a ton of money and we'll build our dream home. Now I'm seeing people in their 20s and I don't fault them for it, but like they get successful, they get some money and they're like, okay, we're in our, we're 31 and are going to build our dream home. That's admirable. But man, like these dream homes now around here, Matt, our market is like, it's $2 million these homes are building. Like, and they were worth less than $1 million 8 years ago. That same house on that same street. That's how the market has exploded around here, right? Because around here, we're 2 hours from Toronto, 2 hours from Ottawa, right? So there are so many people that have retired from those two cities and have moved this way that it's just shot the market up. So now when I see people around me and it's like, we're going to build our dream home. Their dream home that they want to build is like waterfront. And and it's a $2 million endeavor. Now it might be a good investment, but it's just, you know what I mean? It's a different attitude. I can't.
Yeah, I am legitimately happy for them because the house they've lived in for like 33, 34 years. It's paid off. It's been paid off for a while. The house itself isn't so bad. It's a kind of a Victorian-esque house, 2-story limestone basement. They've done a lot of work on it over the years, but it's right downtown. No separation between neighbors. They have a one car garage. They wouldn't have room to build a 2-car garage on their property, I think, if they wanted to. And it's at the bottom of this hill that I'm sure every winter cars go right through their yard. Okay. I am legitimately very happy for them to get out of there and move into something nice. They got a little bit of space now, an outbuilding. His wife, for the first time in her life, is going to have an attached garage that she can pull her vehicle into. She's never had that before. So I am legitimately happy.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to see how it affects other plans. So,
Well,
I don't know.
I'll keep my fingers crossed for you that it pans out for you, because I mean,
I'm interested to see how it affects things with, transfer of ownership or anything, succession planning type stuff.
yeah.
The thing is I think a lot of it still is looking for validation. And, I got to be careful how I word this because it will come off very self-serving. And I wish I wasn't talking about my situation because it could be easily misconstrued and I'm looking for validation where the idea isn't so much anything to do with me and everything to do with, and I think this happens to a lot of people, whether they own a business or not, but I think owners are particularly guilty. They should be a lot more proud of themselves and take a lot more pride in their success attributed to the contributions of the people that they've put around them.
Amen.
And a lot of times that isn't so much like, I hired Jeff and he can crank out the work. And that's really important. Like that should be a factor. But also, you know what? I hired this guy, I hired this gal, and they had these ideas and I went with them.
Mm-hmm.
I just, it kind of blows my mind, the human ego's inability to allow somebody to do that. Like, this idea wasn't mine. I would have never did this. So and so, she
Mm-hmm.
kind of gave me her 2 cents, and I wasn't going to do it, and I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't comfortable with it, and then I thought about it, and it's like, oh, what the heck? And it worked. And then we did this, and it worked, and we did this, and it worked. And then I got more courage, and I wouldn't hem and haw as much. And then, because of that, because of the confidence built up from going with their ideas, I had this idea of my own and it worked. And just, you go back to sports, right? Usually when they're talking to somebody at the end of the game, they're talking about the team effort because that's what it was. Nobody won the game by themselves unless you're playing tennis
Mm-hmm.
or golf. And even at that, right, you would thank your coaches and trainers and all that, but it's crazy to me how hard it is sometimes for them. And I guess I'll pick on my boss a little bit. I think it's hard for him to tell somebody like, the shop's doing really well. We've been doing really well these last 10 years. And I got to level with you. For 20 years, I wasn't doing it right.
Right.
And I hired somebody that could be really strong. I can phrase stuff quite strongly about what I thought. And again, that sounds like I'm trying to really put myself over, and I don't necessarily mean it that way. It's more or less that my success has more to it than just me. And I could do that with myself. I think I've talked about that, where it's wherever I am, how anyone would ever rate that, if you would. There's a lot of pure dumb luck involved with me being there or being here, and then a lot of other people's efforts to push me and help me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this industry is going through such a change right now. It's just like you touched on, right? I think there's a lot of owners now, and I think we're really going to see it in the next 5 years, where they look back and they go, I had 10 really good years at the end. And I might have had like 20 where I was not doing it right. And they weren't necessarily, right and wrong. They were just doing what everybody else was doing, right? But I think what it's driven to now is the fact that there is such a shortage of technicians that it's forcing people to really, really rethink the game. And I would be lying if I said that I don't take pleasure in seeing that happen, because I do. I think we're starting to finally see the value of what somebody like yourself can do, or somebody like, we talk about the top guys, what they can bring, and speaking about your friend in the forklift thing, we don't want to continue to see that happen in this industry, right? So we have to get ahead of that problem. And I think that finally, I don't want to see a whole lot of people, make good money for the last 5 years that they're in it and realize that like the 15 or 25 or whatever the number is, call it a lifetime before that 5 years, they didn't do it right. But at least they had 5 good years, right? At least they saw the change got ahead of it, left it better than they found it for the next people coming in, and made some money. I can resonate what your boss is doing, because I mean they've worked really hard, right? This industry is a grind. You have to embrace the grind, and they want to have something to show when they're thinking about their retirement, of like, this is what all our hard work got us. I have my dream home. This is what we have. And but I don't want to say that, well, I should have everything that they have, because they're the owner, right? I'm an employee. They are the employer. I don't expect that I should have all the accoutrements that they have. But I think that it's got to come a little bit tighter in terms of what we get paid to what a lot of them, the successful ones, are paying themselves. And that's a really unpopular opinion to have. And I'm not necessarily as steadfast about it, because as I start to talk to more shop owners, I realize that they're not necessarily paying themselves as much as I think they should.
Right.
But
I think that's an important point. I think there's a lot of shop owners that are not making very good money.
No. And I understand it's always, this is not a big margin industry. It's always going to be a grind. We just have to accept that because of the relationship of the automobile to the customer. And I think the unfortunate thing is, with where the tech is going, a car is going to be an elite thing in a very near future. I think that when we, so without rambling for another hour, we'll have to come back and do a part 2 at some point, Matt. But I think that we are starting to finally get this change of where we can entice people to come in and stay in the industry. And it's just going to take money. It's going to take money and better treatment. Like you said, everybody needs benefits. They need a 401k. You shouldn't be employing a tech and him having to buy, or her, their own $250 Red Wing work boots, right? Like, it shouldn't happen. It should just be like, okay, you need a set of boots. Here's the company card. Go get yourself some boots.
And we're talking about people. We need people smart enough to do this. They have to be smart enough to fix the cars, whatever level that is, whichever, not even level, just whatever area on the vehicle. They have to be smart enough to do it.
Yeah. It's a different type
and yet
to put a set of ball joints in and do it in 1/4 of the time. It's a different type of smart than somebody that can go and tackle a CAN network issue and solve it. And, I hate to say that, because I said it for years, that the guy that's solving the CAN network problem is way more valuable than the guy banging the ball joints in. I'm not completely flipped on that, but I'm realizing more and more both are very necessary. And if they're necessary, it doesn't really matter how much we pay one more than the other. The key thing is we got to pay them both enough that they're happy, that they feel
because
satisfied.
Because otherwise you're asking somebody that is smart enough to do this and do it really well, but they have to be dumb enough to do it for a career.
Yes, exactly.
Right? They have to overlook a lot of things that they could take that same intelligence and use, and maybe they're flying a desk.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe not. Maybe they're working on houses. They're wiring houses. They're plumbing houses. They're welding. They're construction, whatever.
Engineering at some kind of level.
Yeah,
right? Like,
absolutely engineering. And not only are they making more money per hour or per year, they've got health insurance. They have retirements. They have, depending on the situation, the work environment itself is better. Let's forget like the skilled trades, and that same person is working for a software company,
mm-hmm.
and maybe they are working in a cubicle, but it's air conditioned, it's heated. It's not even it's not an 8 to 5. It's basically, I need you to get this done within the next week. And if you can get it done in 2 days, take the rest of the week off.
Mm-hmm.
The flex time, or whatever you want to call it. Like, that's what we're competing against. And I'm not saying auto repair is ever going to be able to be flex time. That's not realistic. But we can offer a lot of things that can make that decision more difficult, rather than we're waiting for these people that just love to fix cars, and their wife has a really good job, or their husband has a really good job where they get the health insurance and the benefits, so they can just work for the money. That's what we're forcing.
Yeah.
It's like,
imagine making your marital decisions on what their health, benefits plan and retirement package looks like, right? That's how you have to pick your mate now is based on that. It shouldn't have to be that way, right?
Yeah, especially if you're young and you're starting to have kids, and basically, he or she somebody is working darn near for free to pay for childcare, daycare, and the other one's working for benefits.
Not a lot left over at the end to build that dream house.
Yeah. So why we have to fix our businesses and our business practices to make enough money to give somebody enough money to really live in the geographical area of where they live in the shop and all that, plus outfit the shop properly to do the job that we're professing to be able to do at a professional level, in a work environment that is enticing, well lit, clean, probably climate controlled, whatever. And then still more money yet to offer benefits to compete with all these other professions. That's where we're at. That's what we have to do. What's the alternative? Otherwise we're just going to suffocate ourselves.